Okay, here we are, episode 5. Did you think we'd get this far, Dustin?
I still don't think we're this far.
Okay, we'll call it 4.5 for you then. But no,
4.5, yeah.
episode 5 of the We Were Young podcast. Special hat today. This is actually the Apache Troop. Was this your guys' official logo, Glenn, or kind of unofficial?
Yeah, for the for the 1st and 9th Cavalry Regiment. Yeah, that's the official one.
All right.
1st Squadron, 9th Cavalry.
Thank you to Daryl and Julie Price, who gave us this hat in Louisiana. I love this hat because you'll like this, Glenn. Dustin was wearing it that night when we went out to dinner, and there was a couple guys looked like they were from Fort Polk or had gotten out of the military, and they walked up to him and they're like, "So you're 1'9", huh?" And I was thinking, "Oh snap, we're about to get some publicity on the internet." But he explained what we were doing for the documentary, and we all left friends.
Yeah, it turned out really well, actually. Those guys started off with, "I'm going to kick your ass," and ended with, "Oh, well, check it out." So,
yeah, that's the way it usually goes.
But for today's guest, he was in Vietnam for 18 months, 1969 to 1970. Aircraft commander on a lift ship with Apache Troop, 1st of the 9th. After getting out of, successfully returning home from Vietnam, worked in industrial advertising, got a college degree, and went into, you said, business development?
Right.
With the likes of small private companies like Boeing, and is now happily retired. Please welcome Glen Senkowski. I got your last name. I should have checked that, but Senkowski.
That's for great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for joining us today, Glenn, and agreeing to do it. We really appreciate having you on. So I am going to be a good co-host to my partner in crime, Dustin, and let you start off, Dustin.
Oh, hey, thanks. That's really nice of you.
Benevolent human being.
Glenn, how did you end up in Vietnam, and how did you end up once there in Apache Troop?
Well, you were cutting out on me a little bit up in the front there. Can you say that again?
Sure. How did you end up in Vietnam, and how did you get to Apache Troop?
Well, I actually volunteered for Vietnam. I was in college. I didn't belong in college. So I had always wanted to be a military pilot, and the Army was the only group that was taking pilots that didn't have college degrees. So I wound up going into the Army aviation program. And then everybody, if you hadn't already done 1 or 2 tours in Vietnam, you got out of helicopter flight school, you went to Vietnam. I mean, that's just the way it was in '69. I think there were 103 people maybe in my unit that graduated, and of those, 101 went to Vietnam, and the other ones had already done pulled tours in Vietnam. So you knew once you graduated from flight school you were going to Vietnam. So that was a foregone conclusion.
No surprises in that.
No, not at all. So,
and I forgot to ask, so were you a warrant officer or?
Yes, I was. They tried to give me a commission later, actually probably about 6 months in country. They were trying to get rid of warrant officers at that time. So they were offering direct commissions. I chose not to do that. Matter of fact, a lot of us chose not to do that.
What's the difference?
Well, the difference was it wasn't that much of an increase in pay, and you had a whole lot more responsibilities. That we call them RLOs, real live officers. They had all sorts of different things that they had to be in charge of, where the warrants, we just flew.
Well, and when you get to, a high enough warrant officer, 2, 3, 4, it's kind of like the command sergeant majors, right? You have a certain level of officers that you don't really listen to anymore.
exactly. My hoots mate Mike was what he retired out. It finally made him retire as a W-5, and he was flying his last missions in Iraq. And
That's the unicorn of the military, isn't it? The W-5.
yeah, pretty much.
Nice. All right.
So how'd you end up in A Troop? Did they just assign you, or?
Well, what happened was I flew into Cameron Bay, and they came through the barracks while they were going to assign us to our final units once we got into Cameron Bay. And a guy came through the barracks saying, anybody want to fly for the 1st and the 9th? And I said, oh, I do. Because I'd had an instructor in flight school that was just telling us all about the war stories of flying in the Ashaw and things like that. And I said, well, if I'm going to be here, I want to be where the excitement is. So I volunteered for the 1st and the 9th. And at that point, I think it was predominantly voluntary. And then once I got into the 1st and 9th at headquarters at Fort Finn, they just assigned me to A Troop.
It reminds me when I went to the academy, when I was with Customs, the night before I left, I'd gone out to dinner with my dad and everything was great. And we left the restaurant and he grabbed me and he said, Dave, I'm going to give you the best advice I can possibly give you for the academy. And it's what I learned in boot camp. Don't volunteer for shit.
Exactly.
And then I ended up class president. And he was very disappointed in me.
Yeah, I kind of describe myself as a serial volunteering person.
Well, I kind of figured, I knew the other guy wanted to be class president. I was like, oh man, we're in trouble. So that's kind of the role of the serial volunteer.
Yeah.
All right. We actually, as you know from seeing our previous episodes, we like to talk about kind of the first day you were in combat or contact. A bit different. You're our first air crew that we've talked to, but your first day not only was like literally your first day, not just your first contact, your first day. It's you have a perspective. When Dwayne Blower was on, he said that he was assigned 1st of the 9th because they just had a really bad day where they'd lost a lot of people. And that was actually, you are a firsthand witness to that day. And I saw your write-up on Facebook, a very beautiful, heartfelt write-up about that day. Can we just ask you, what for people who don't know what happened, but also just what it was like for you to see what was going on and to be in that?
Yeah, I got introduced to the downside early. I'll just put it that way, that once again, I volunteered. I was trying to get on one of the Hueys that was shot down, and then they kicked me off because they had already had a crew full for that one. So then the scout pilot that was flying he was covering the extraction of the blues. I don't know if you want me to go into the whole story or
wherever you want to go with it.
Well, just as a little bit of background, there was a scout bird that had been shot down that morning, and everybody scrambled, went out, and like I said, I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing because I hadn't been assigned to a platoon yet. So I tried to get on one of the Hueys, and they kicked me off, and then they took out the blues, put the blues in. They secured the loach while the loach got slung out. And then it was time to go out and pick up the blues once they got the helicopter out. So when that happened, the white platoon leader came around and said, you want to fly as my observer on this? And I said, oh yeah, because I wanted to get into scouts. So I jumped in, and I was just supposed to be flying recon around the PZ while they picked up the Huey lift ships picked up the blues. So we got out there, and that's when it hit the fan. I mean, when we were circling around the Hueys as they went down to pick up the blues, we did not know at that time that the North Vietnamese had set up an ambush. And the idea being, because the blues, as far as I know, hadn't had any contact while they were taking out the downed aircraft. And what I surmised was that the North Vietnamese had just gone ahead and set up an ambush rather than taking on the Blues. They said, we got a chance here to get some helicopters too. So as the Blues were coming out, what I hear from Andy Anderson was our red platoon leader. He was flying high. And what he told me was that a B-40 rocket propelled grenade came out of the tree line, hit the number 3 Huey, which rolled over into the number 2, and they both went down. And I was looking in the opposite direction when that happened. I just felt this, it's hard to describe. I mean, it's just this thump. You don't really hear anything or see anything. It's just this thud, getting hit by a shock wave, I guess is what it is. I looked over, and we had 2 Hueys burning on the ground. So I think it was Don Frederick was the pilot on the aircraft I was on, and he just immediately landed down between the 2 crashed Hueys. And we went out and I was looking for survivors. It said, this was, like I say, this was my first mission and my second day in the troop. And I didn't have a clue, about what was going on, what I was supposed to be doing. They don't cover that in training. So I just got out and followed White, Don Frederick. That was his call sign was White. And I followed him, and he found one of the survivors that had a bad head wound. He said, getting back to the loach. So I let him back in. Like I say, he thought he was blind, but it was blood running down his head. So I got him back into the loach, and then I believe that White came back with another guy and put him in the back with the torque. So I think there were 2 of us, and I got in the front seat, and then we took off to take the 2 wounded back to 45th Surge at Tay Ninh. And then once that was over, there was a whole lot of other things going on. Apparently 2 other Hueys, the lead Huey came back to pick up survivors, and then there was another A Troop Huey that was out in the area. I think they were doing the mail run, and they came out and picked us. So they got out everybody that was alive. And then it came to us. We had to go back through and fly through the area to, do a body count and to see if there was anybody that we'd missed. And that was my first day. And then, the other, I guess the end of the thing was after we got back to the base and I'm walking in, I started limping, and I found out I'd been shot in the leg. So it was an exciting first day, to say the least.
Just pure adrenaline. You hadn't noticed it yet, or?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I had that happen many times where I'd have an adrenaline. Once you start coming down, you get the shakes so bad. I would have to sit there in the helicopter on other times, and just because my legs were like rubber. I think, well, I don't know. I can't speak for everybody, but that was fairly usual for me under the bad missions.
Yeah, and actually in your write-up, you mentioned you were standing in chest-high elephant grass, and someone had to tell you to get down because you were being shot at, and you kind of realized it's different than the movies.
Yeah, I was standing there. I heard these popping noises, and I didn't know what they were. And I don't know how colorful you want to get about this, but I had a few of the guys that were laid on the ground told me, "Get down, asshole," because they're shooting at us. And I didn't realize what those noises were. I was expecting to bang, bang, bang sort of thing, but that wasn't it. That's not what they sound like.
Not quite like when Sylvester Stallone picks up a weapon that had just been used from the enemy, and suddenly it's twice as loud because he's the hero.
Yeah.
So, but that's good advice. There's rounds coming in. Maybe get down.
Yeah, it was a very good idea.
So when you said you got shot, did that come when you were in the helicopter, or was that when you were down on the ground, or do you
I assume it was when I was on the ground, when I heard the rounds going by. And for a long time, I thought it could have also been ammunition cooking off in the Uis at that point. Both of them were fully on fire and everything was going off there on the Willie Pete's and the frags and the smoke grenades. And it was quite a spectacle. It's something you have to see to really appreciate what's going on. But I'd like to say standing there and have the feeling the ground shaking from 2 helicopters burning. It's not something I would wish on anybody, but
yeah, and
certainly you don't forget it.
Yeah, and that's been in our test screenings in the film. Doc Del Valle has an incredibly powerful, I mean, he lays out what a downed helicopter is like and what they saw, and it's not a pretty thing to see, and it's not a pretty moment in the movie, and it's very intentionally not pretty. And we stuck with it the whole way and don't leave his face. And we've had some people in the test screening say, why do you have to be so graphic? Because this is reality.
What it is.
Yeah, it's Doc and all the other blues. I've seen a lot of pictures taken. I have a hard time with it. I mean, to be perfectly honest, it's not something that, because just for the average person, it's pretty horrific when you know those guys, they were your friends. And then I have to feel so bad for the blues having to haul them out of there.
That's what Craig said, because he went to the fire department and he said it was different because I didn't know them. I was just responding to a call.
That's the one thing about that first mission. I didn't know anybody. So, and then 2 weeks later, I was doing the same thing for the person that had become my best friend in the unit. And it's a whole different thing when you actually know the guys that you're pulling out. And you can't even recognize them except for the fact that they were in the aircraft, earlier. So nobody changed any seats. It's the same guys, because you can't tell. It's hard to even tell that they're human. I mean, literally.
Yeah, and it is one of the things that we've gone back and forth on, because it is, we're not doing a scripted movie. This is real life, real stories, and that's what we fall back on. Like, we need people to know, like, this is your guys' truth, and we'd be doing a disservice if we shied away from that.
Well, I admire you for doing this sort of thing, because to me, I feel like so many people become desensitized by the Hollywood versions of things, and you don't appreciate, if that's somebody that's your best friend, and you just see something like that in the movie and say, oh boy, that's it, but when it's your best friend and it's happening over and over again, it's hard to deal with that kind of situation. And like I say, with the desensitizing that I see going on, it doesn't do anybody any favors. And when I came back, actually, my mother was a teacher, and she'd have me come talk to her kids in their 6th grade class. And I'd bring slides like what you're talking about, and I'd show them. I says, these are real people. I knew these people. And it's something that people really need to see and get some empathy for the guys that do that. Like I say, it's a multi-level thing with me. First, I'm losing friends, and then I got the blues that are there having to pull their bodies out of the wreckage, and knowing firsthand what that's like, to just have to go do that over and over again. You got the feeling for the guys that died, and then you got the feeling for the blues that had to keep doing that every day. And then you got to wonder why. That's the big issue for me.
That's been a common refrain too. You know, why did this all happen? You know,
Yeah.
why can't our governments get along? Like why this stretch of land, um, which probably won't be solved. Like,
Yeah.
but I mean, we look at it. There's a quote from Steven Spielberg I read a long time ago when they asked him about Saving Private Ryan in the opening scene. And again, why was that opening scene to Saving Private Ryan so graphic? And his response was in his opinion, and I agree with it, for any war movie to be a real war movie or a good war movie, in his opinion, it needs to be inherently anti-war. And I know that takes on a different meaning when we talk about Vietnam, but not in the protesting type of way, but in the way that he would hope people watch it and think, why do we do this? Why do we go to war? And that type of, and we've kind of held that through. So thank you, Steven Spielberg. I'm sure you're watching this. But that has informed us. Like, we need to show the truth of it and let people really think about it.
Yeah, I just the first time I saw Saving Private Ryan, I just totally broke down, and I'll at least get teary, every time. I've seen it many, many times, and it's even knowing what's coming. It's I don't know if it's cathartic for me or what it is, but I have some. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to describe.
The part that always gets me, and I think I said it on the episode with Doc, is when he asks his wife to tell him that he led a good life, and I'm like, dust in the room. So, Dustin, sorry.
What's that?
Yeah, Dustin, go ahead.
Oh, I was just I was going to ask. So then you got rotated into running your own lift ship, yeah?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Did you after you were in the after that first couple days, they rotated you into running your own ship?
Yeah, well, what happened was I wound up becoming a lift aircraft commander 3 weeks later.
Okay.
And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that we had injured pilots, from the 2 U's that got shot down, and they needed to get some more lift people. So I wound up going into lift, and then like I said, they made me an aircraft commander 3 weeks later, which is pretty bizarre. Typically it'd be about 6 months before you become. Yeah.
A true battlefield promotion.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. It's more like, hey, let's throw him in and see if he floats. That's really the kind of training that you got. It took me on a few different missions, a couple hot LRP extractions, things like that. And so there you go. You're an aircraft commander.
You look good to me. And I guess the question then is, we talk about the Blues coming in. It wasn't always for you. Did you ever make any unplanned landings out in the woods, either from mechanicals or, as RB Alexander once called it, enemy-caused mechanicals?
Yeah, I did, but I was fortunate always enough because we got back to someplace safe. So that was the best thing. They had the being shot down. There's being shot down right there on the spot where you land on top of the guys that are shooting at you, and then there's being shot down where you can get far enough away from them that you're reasonably safe. So that happened to me 3 times, but it was, like I said, I always managed. I didn't get to where I was planning on going, but I got far enough away that I wasn't in any jeopardy.
You weren't near the people who obviously weren't very happy that you guys had just gone in and wreaked some havoc and probably don't want to talk it out when you land.
Yeah.
Just use your words. No.
So you ended up staying 18 months. Was that because, why was that?
I liked what I was doing. I was good at it. And the thing that really tipped the scales for me was that I was getting close to the end of my first tour, and the squadron, well, our troop commander came in and said, "Hey, you're going to go fly for the first of the Ninth Squadron commander." And I said, "I don't want to fly for the first of the Ninth Squadron commander." He says, "Well, I'm sorry if I made that sound like I was asking you." So I said, "Okay, well, I'll show you." And I said, if you volunteered to extend your tour, you got to pick your unit. So I said, I'm gonna trick him, and I'm gonna sign up for an extra 6 months, and I'm gonna stay in A Troop, and that. And then I
Showed
said,
him.
"No."
And I'm sure he said, "Wow, that was very well thought out. I'm proud of you." From my experience, people above you in the chain aren't usually too nice when you outsmart them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I was set up, actually.
They knew who you were already. They just didn't need to give you the right prop.
Oh no, you decided to stay 6 months. No.
Yeah, I tried it again
So-
6 months later, but I was too quick for him that time.
Actually, I want to go back one beat. You mentioned that you actually tried to get on one of the lift ships on that first day that went down, and you ended up on the Scout. What was that like for you? You know, did you have thoughts about that? Like, I could have been on that ship. Like, what went?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that the guy that I hauled back to the loach that had the head wound, I think was the guy that kicked me out of that seat.
Wow.
I don't remember specifically, but it seems like I saw one of the guys the next day running around with his head bandaged up that was the door gunner on one of the Hueys. And as I recall, I didn't recognize him. I'd only seen him that one time, just for a couple seconds. But I think he was the guy that I got kicked out of the ship by.
And that,
So that was very coincidental.
just the randomness of everything, really.
Yeah.
Did you
So
ever get back to Flying Scout? Oh, sorry, Dave.
No, go ahead.
Did you ever get back to Flying Scout missions at all, or did you stick with Lift?
No, I actually I wound up as an aircraft commander in Lift, and in weapons I was flying B model gunships for a while. But early on there was it was kind of a freewheeling sort of outfit when I got there. It got tighter as time went by, but during the first few months I was there, on your days off, you could fly wherever you wanted to fly on. So I was going out and flying missions as an observer on a scout ship. And we had one of our scout pilots, I think he qualified for CIB by going out with the Blues. And then we got in a new change of commander, says, "We're sending pilots out in enlisted men's spots. This is not going to ever happen again." And so that got shut down pretty quickly. But yeah, I did fly a few missions in scouts, and I love flying loaches. I mean, it's like a Ferrari, you know. You're driving a dump truck like a Huey, and then they put you in a Ferrari. I mean, who's not going to like that?
Just hanging it out treetop level, right?
Yeah, but it wasn't much fun being an observer in the left seat, because you're on the high side of the turns the whole day. So you got the G-forces just pounding into the seat the whole time for, like 2 hours straight. And you can't really see anything, because you'd almost have to physically pull yourself up to the side of the aircraft to be able to look out the side. I mean, you had enough where I was covering the left side of the aircraft, but really all I had to do was throw out a red smoke grenade if we took fire, if somebody started shooting, and then I could possibly hit something through the chin bubble if I was going to shoot through the chin bubble, but I never had to do that because you couldn't overcome the G forces. I mean, getting up and trying to shoot out the door on that side. So you had to have a strong stomach to fly Oscar in a Loach. I can tell you that.
I think we've just stumbled on a new fitness craze. Put you in the left seat and just fly and have you do sit-ups.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the troop rules is you cleaned up your own barf. Didn't matter what rank you were, you puked in the helicopter, you cleaned it up yourself.
Oh, that's great.
It's the great evener of it all. Go ahead, Dustin.
So you extended, and then did you get any R&R with that? Did you ever rotate back to Hawaii or anything?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that, Dustin.
Did you get any R&R while you were there? You were there for 18 months. So
yeah, I took one of them. I didn't want to leave.
Yeah.
It was it's hard to explain. Actually, I guess I took two. I could have had four, but I took two.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like you lost your edge. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
The first time I did it, I came back, I was very uncomfortable. And then when I did my re-up, I got 30 days home. And while I was home, my tour gunner was killed in action. And two other guys I knew were killed. So I didn't take any more after that. I mean, I just did the last 6 months not going anywhere, just staying there because it's too painful. I mean, it's if you could just turn it off like a faucet and go and have a party and come back feeling good, but I knew what I was coming back to, and you had to keep that edge. You know, it's like in Apocalypse with Charlie or Martin Sheen in the hotel room talking about that. You know, he's sitting in the hotel room getting weaker while Charlie's in the bush getting stronger, and that's true. I mean, you lose your edge, and it takes a little while to get it back.
Well, and actually, let's talk about that for a second, because we've talked about coming home with everyone, and we'll talk about that with you as well. But I think it is interesting for that 30 days that you came home. Could you really rest on that 30 days? Because like you say, you may go to a party, but 25, 24, 23 more days, you're going back, but also, thinking about your friends over there. Like, is that truly restful to come home for 30 days?
Not really. I mean, it's, I needed it. It was like a mental health break. But the funny part about that was my parents picked me up. I was supposed to come well, first of all, when you leave Vietnam, there was no way to communicate with anybody. They put you down at Benoit, and you just get the next available flight, and it just comes up when it comes up. So you have no way of telling anybody when you're coming home or where. And my dad thought I was coming into McChord Air Force Base on December 24th, and I wound up in New Jersey on December 25th. They brought me into New Jersey, and I spent Christmas Eve sleeping on a pool table in Newark. And my dad was at McChord Air Force Base in California waiting for every aircraft that came in. So that was kind of peculiar. And then I came home and they had a big banner in front of the house and stuff. That was really nice, and had a party. And then, like 30 days later, I asked them if they could take me to the airport. And they said, well, where are you going? I said, I'm going back to Vietnam. And they didn't know I was going back. My mother thought that she thought that because it was so close to Christmas, they'd let me come home early. I said, no, the Army doesn't work that way.
On the plus side, you'll get another party next time you come home.
No, I didn't.
Or I was going to say, or were they like, we've already done this?
Yeah. I got my party, and that was it. I guess I didn't know if I was going to leave again, and I tried to.
So when you came home for the final time, What was that experience like? You know, we've been able to track it to people who came through Texas seem to have a much better experience than those who came through Berkeley. But what was your final? You know, both like literally arriving, but also with your family.
Well, I've heard the stories about people, how, how veterans coming back from Vietnam, and I didn't experience that. I don't know what to call it. I mean, the shunning that I got was from the government, because when I came home, we couldn't wear our uniforms. They wouldn't let us out into a normal airfield or airport except in civilian clothes. So, I mean, there was a shame that was built into coming back by the government requiring you to not wear your uniform. And that hurt worse than most everything. I mean, it's, when your own government.
Did they do that because they were worried about the protesters, or why did they make that decision to have you guys wear civvies?
We were quite insulated in Vietnam from what was going on as far as protesting and stuff. So they just said, nope, you're not. They flew us back into a military base and said, you got to change into your civilian clothes before you get out of here. And then they put us on a bus wearing civvies and took us to a real airport, and never explained why. And so, you could kind of connect the dots on it, but I missed all of the protesting and things like that. I didn't see any of that, particularly when I was in Vietnam. Didn't know about Kent State or anything along those lines. That was very, very well scrubbed out in Vietnam in the news.
Well, and actually doing a kind of intellectual exercise for you, they're telling you can't wear your uniform. You don't, they're not explaining why. Obviously, as you said, it's making you, it's not a good experience to not be able to wear it with pride. But if they had explained it, as we're all assuming it was because of the protesters, if they had explained you can't wear it because American citizens are throwing rotten fruit, and we, as much as people try and deny it, we've met soldiers who were spit on. What would, in your opinion now, would that have been better, or what would that have been like for you coming home to hear that?
At least I would have understood why. I mean, it was like it was the way they did it for me. It was like a dirty little secret, rather than just coming out and saying, look, there's people that are going to attack you, ridicule you. And if they just said something like that, so, you need to wear civilian clothes, or they should have made it optional. If I don't care, I would have worn my uniform regardless. So you just got to consider what's, the source.
Yeah. Like we say, we can strongly suggest, but we're all adults. Do what you want.
Yeah.
All right, Dustin.
Did you go back to work right away, or did you hang out with your folks? What did you do when you got home?
What I did was I just chilled on the end of my second tour, because I had 90 days of accrued leave because I hadn't taken any when I was in Vietnam. So I was off for 90 days and just kind of hung around. And then after that, I had to report to Fort Bragg. So they sent me to Fort Bragg, which I thought was bizarre because I was first cav. So I would have thought I'd go to Fort Hood. And what I found out was that I had been awarded a direct commission to first lieutenant, but it was first lieutenant infantry. And I didn't find this out till I got down to Bragg, because I got there and they have an in processing where they ask you what do you want to do? And I said, I don't want to do anything. And so they put me in an aviation unit that didn't have any helicopters. So I was there for, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And the only thing I really did at Fort Bragg was I ran the squirrel cage at the officers' casino night. And then I said, I want, no, then I went in and I says, I want to resign. I said, no, I came back. I said, I want to go back to Vietnam. And they said, well, you can't go back to Vietnam until you've been in state for a year. I said, well, what are my other options? And they said, well, you got this first lieutenant commission. I said, what's that all about? I said, yeah. And come to find out, they'd given me a direct commission to first lieutenant infantry. And the reason I was at Bragg was they were going to send me to infantry officer school there. And I said, I'm not particularly interested in going to infantry officer school and then going back to Vietnam leading like the Blues. That didn't seem like a good idea at the time. And plus I'd lost 8 months time in grade. And I think it was only like $75 more a month to be a first lieutenant than a warrant. I said, well, that's stupid. I said, well, what else can I do? He says, well, you can resign. And I said, okay. So I resigned, and 10 days later, I was off active duty.
Yeah.
Because at that point, the war was starting to wind down. They had helicopter pilots coming out their ears anyhow. So, they were just cutting you loose. So I just went and did my reserve time, and that was it.
So you can go back to Vietnam infantry, or you can resign.
Yeah.
Take the deal.
Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer to me.
I mean, way to take advantage of your 18 months of experience as a combat helicopter pilot. Like,
Yeah.
go to infantry. That actually leads to a question we haven't asked on the podcast, but we've asked throughout our years of interviewing. And I'll tell you the pattern that we see after I ask it, because I don't want to influence this.
Okay.
But for you as helicopter crew, who do you think had a more dangerous job, or had it, I don't want to say worse because it's combat, but would you have rather been up in the air or down on the ground?
Oh, I'd rather be up in the air. I mean, even being a scout, I'd rather be up in the air. And that's kind of funny, because I think you've heard this from the Blues. The Blues would say first they couldn't wait to get back on the ground, and I'd say I couldn't wait to get back in the air. It's how you're wired. All the Blues told me that. They were scared dustless when they were in the helicopters, and once they were on the ground, they were happy, and I was just the opposite.
You did guess the pattern. Yes, the Blues will tell you when it hit the fan, you can hide behind a tree. Bullets, a tree stop bullets, but clouds don't. But
yeah,
when we talk to air crews, they're like, yeah, we could turn and fly away and regroup. So,
yeah, but they were. I totally understand that, because they were packed in there like sardines. So the only guys on the outside had any fire, could return fire when they were being shot at. And I wouldn't want to have been stuffed back in the back of one of those things like that.
Yep. Dustin, you want to, in terms of returning home, you usually take this section?
I usually do. It's true. I'm interested in what people do with their lives. How did you end up in advertising?
Well, that's another good one, because when I came back or got out of the Army, I went on unemployment. So I was a helicopter pilot on unemployment that didn't have a commercial helicopter license. So there was nothing they could do with me. And so I just go into unemployment every week, and I'm looking for jobs, and it just happened that finally they sent me to. They said, this was in Kalamazoo, Michigan. There was a company called Fuller, and they said, well, the Fuller has an opening for an advertising assistant. Go in. So I went over there, and I go in, and the first thing I tell them is, so I don't know anything about brushes, and they just busted out laughing. And then the HR person called somebody else and had me repeat that I didn't know anything about brushes. And come to find out, it was Fuller Transmission. They made truck transmissions. So they thought that was pretty funny. And then it just so happened that the two guys, the two managers that were hiring, one of them was a bombardier on B-29s in World War II, and the other one was a navigator on B-24s. So I just fit right in with that group and stayed there for
great.
8 years writing service manuals. I really enjoyed it, but I felt like I needed to do something more, so I started going to night school and got an associate's degree, and then finally got a 4-year.
And so you are with 2 World War II veterans. Did you guys ever talk about your experiences between, did you find commonalities in besides the ticker tape parade that World War II veterans had, but just coming home from war, did you find a lot of commonalities between for World War II and for Vietnam, for just as veterans?
There really wasn't a lot of discussion. I think I would say that aside from those two guys, for the first 10 years I was home, people didn't even know I'd been to Vietnam, because by then there was such a stigma attached to being a Vietnam veteran that, it just wasn't discussed. The camaraderie that I had with my two bosses it wasn't spoken. It was just the fact that all three of us had been through some pretty ugly stuff in the wars, and we never really talked about any of it in any kind of detail. It's just the fact that all three of us knew the other ones. You could feel your pain. So that's kind of the way that worked.
All right. So you said for about the first 10 years, was there an impetus that you talked after 10, or was it a slow for you, or did that put you up to the reunions in North Dakota, or what was your process to start talking about it?
Well, what got things rolling was actually the first Iraq War, and when everybody was coming home and everybody was being treated like a hero when they came back, it was kind of bittersweet because we didn't get any of that. At least I never experienced any of that, but it was still great that the American public were getting behind their servicemen and welcoming them home. So that kind of opened the doors as far as discussing things. But even with my own parents for years, I was wondering, why aren't they asking me what happened? And I started writing things down, like what I sent to you and what I posted on Facebook. And they said, well, we didn't think you wanted to talk about it. And I said, well, I didn't think you wanted to hear about it. So, neither of us were communicating. And then that kind of opened things up to where I started talking more about it.
And what was that like for you to get that initial kind of bridging of the gap and finding out, like, oh my gosh, someone does want to hear, like, a slow process, or just that first process, like it was good for you, or?
Oh, it felt great. Because like I say, all that time I've been isolating myself from everybody else by thinking that they either thought I was a baby killer, or they didn't want to hear all the ugly stories I had to tell. And then coming to find out that they really cared about what had happened. I had a friend that when I was first starting to experiment with what I was calling writing my journals, and there was one event that I was particularly ashamed of, and I finally was comfortable enough with this person to let her read it, because I just felt like I trusted her. And she wrote it. She just broke down and cried and started hugging me. And she said that it had to be horrible for you. And I never saw it as being horrible for me. I saw it as me being ashamed of, what had happened to me, rather than I was a subject of somebody's, not pity, but their empathy, to say, oh my God, it had to be awful for you. When I was just thinking, it's weird. It's kind of it's complicated.
Yeah, but that does go along with what we're saying. It's not about solving problems when you talk to a veteran, just empathy, and just an ear.
Yeah.
Have you been to any of the reunions that Apache Troop has done?
Yeah, I went to the '93 reunion at Bart's place, and actually, we had an impromptu reunion when I was living in Seattle. Minimac, I don't know if you've talked to Minimac, Bill McIntosh. And come to find out, he was right there in the area, and Craig was there. So we just had kind of an impromptu reunion at Minimac's place with him and Craig and Tony Cortez and some of the other guys. And that was nice. I mean, it was a nice get together. There was some trauma for me because I met my crew chief, Kippy Gray, was killed in December of '69, and I just kind of pushed it away. I was home on leave, and he's there and then he's gone. And it's like, it's easy to shut out that kind of situation. So I just kind of ignored it. And then Tony brought an older guy over to me and said, "This is Kippy's dad." And it's still there, that I had grieved about that. So anyhow, I spent the rest of the time with Kippy's dad, and he had brought all kinds of stuff, and he was just totally immersed in his son. I mean, he had everything, all the after action reports and everything that had to do with him. And so we went through that. We got hooked up, and we got pretty close. And I met Kippy's twin sister, Kitty, and so his family was kind of conflicted, where his mother didn't want to hear anything about it, what was going on, and of course Bumpa Gray wanted to know everything about it, and they were butting heads about that, and then there's Kippy's twin sister she thought she wanted to know, and his brother Sandy wanted to know, and Marianne, I think she's always been kind of ambivalent about it. I mean, I haven't had any contact with Marianne other than we kind of trade stuff back and forth on Facebook, but she's always been kind of on the periphery. But anyhow, at the reunion, it was going to be Kippy's dad, and Kitty and Sandy were going to come to the reunion with me. And then his dad, I guess he broke his hip, as I recall, so he couldn't make it, but Kitty and Sandy came. So I went to it with them, and it was hard. I mean, it was so hard. I just haven't been to another one since. I mean, that's the upshot of the whole thing. It's just, there's too much bitter to cover the sweet or something like that. It's just so hard. And I've had guys wanting me to come, but I just can't do it.
Yeah.
They're intense gatherings. We've been to 2, and they're very intense.
Yeah. And I know some guys that I flew with that just don't want to have communication, period. It tracks them. I think Doc was doing that a lot too. Yeah. And you find guys that say, "No, I just don't call me." They just want to totally bury it. And you have to respect. Everybody's got a different opinion on how they want to deal with the things that have happened to them. And so I respect that. The other guys say, "Just no." That's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be in your time.
Yeah.
And that has surprised us when we've gone to the reunions. Both times, there's been people there that's their first time back in contact with the troop. We wouldn't have known that this was their first time talking. Tony Cortez came up. So we did a screening at the Museum of Flight at Boeing, and he hadn't seen some of these guys in 50 years. And you wouldn't have known, just fell right back in.
Yeah.
But I mean, what would your, you know, like you said, you started talking to your parents, and it was really a good uh, feeling for you to know that they wanted to hear. When a veteran is ready to talk or feels that they're ready to talk, what advice would you have for that veteran to go out and do that, or anyone who's thinking maybe that they might want to do it?
Oh, well, that's a tough one. Because everybody's different, you know. I just kind of fluked into what I was doing. I think I would encourage just about everybody to at least write a journal, you know, do some journaling and put that out in front of their families or people that they feel safe with, and see what kind of response they get. And they may be really surprised, like I was really surprised at the responses that I got. So, you know, I used to, when I was doing this like psychological stuff for PTSD, and that's the first thing they tell you, start writing it down. You know, write it down. I said, you know, I thought big ass waste of time. So, but I finally started doing it, and then the idea is it gets it out of your head onto paper to where you can actually communicate with somebody, because I, you know, it's just, there's stuff in my head that I, you know, you can't just start dumping on somebody. And so I think journals are really important for people that are suffering from PTSD, and regardless of how they got it, you know, it's, I would say it probably works for just about anybody. It's a safe way to open up communication.
There's just something about that tactile feel of writing.
The action, I think, is a real big part of it. We talked to Dr. Clymer a little bit, and he said proactive activity was really, really important for moving through PTS. That it really just like helps push things along. Actually doing a thing.
And for me, it's a lot of rumination too, because that seems, I don't know, it may not be right for everybody, but I ruminate a lot, and I feel uncomfortable ruminating as much as I ruminate, but that's what I do in the journals, is I just keep churning and churning until I get it to where I think it's right.
Yeah. I mean, I have so many of these. I think I've filled up 3 of these so far making the movie. And I usually have, when we write screenplays, I have to write it first, even though I know I'm going to, you know, go and put it in the computer and actually start formulating. There's just something about starting with the pen and paper that, even if I take it verbatim and put it into the computer, it's just the process. I hear dogs.
Here.
Dustin, do you have any? How we doing on your questions?
I only have 2 more,
and they're
which
10
we
parts
were
each.
starting to touch on. So it's a good little piece, which is how much have you talked about your experience, and how have those conversations impacted you going forward with your day-to-day life?
Beyond just the initial with the parents?
Yeah, beyond the initial conversation with your parents.
Well, my career was over 40 years in defense industry. Mm-hmm. And one common denominator that I found, like I said, retired out of Boeing, retired out of Northrop Grumman, retired out of United Technologies. And the one common denominator for those companies, and most of the other ones I know of, is that they treasure their veterans. And so I've had a lot of experience, being interviewed and things like that within the companies on Veterans Days, and so I get a opportunity to air things out in front of other employees, which is nice. I appreciate that. And I think the companies appreciate that too. And it's not just lip service to your veterans. It's, hey, we got guys that have been there, done that, in this company. And here's some insight for you. And I think that's a critical thing, to have empathy with the people that are using the equipment that you're making. And I'd started out on the Comanche program with Glen Senkowski, and we were in a kickoff meeting, and they were going around the room, and they had all these pictures that they'd done, paintings of all these things hanging on the wall for what the Comanche should do. And I said, you know, I was flying 20 years ago, actually almost 30 years ago, doing these things that you're showing on the walls in here in a $2.5 million helicopter. Now explain to me why I need a $10 million helicopter. Yeah, so the focus, you know, the emphasis was on the wrong syllable. So we need to start focusing on what the Army aviators couldn't do now that they should be able to do, rather than we could, you know, more of the same. We're just doing it in a more expensive helicopter.
Inflation. But yeah, actually, man, our first test screening was at the Museum of Flight. Technically,
Yeah,
they're a
the
separate
docent
entity
there.
from Boeing, but right there at Boeing, and it's because they do want to. I mean, it was on Veterans Day, and they had a lot of their employees who were veterans there, and just want to show that commitment. So that was a very nice event. Huge theater. That was cool.
Yeah, I was a docent at the Museum of Flight. And
Okay,
I
it's
had
a
a little
great
kid
place.
I had a little kid ask me what a docent is. And I said, well, that means I work here, but they docent pay me.
I like to say that I'm a semi-professional screenwriter, as in we do it all the time, but we don't get paid for it yet.
We don't get paid for it. Yeah.
You said you had a second question, Dustin?
No, he answered it. I was wondering how speaking about his experiences with family and coworkers, like how it changed his relationship. But it sounds like it just provided an opportunity to be tighter with the people you were spending time with.
Yep, I believe so.
All right. And so I'm going to open it up to you, Glenn, for the last bit here. You've done an amazing job. I look at my sheet of talking points, not questions, and it's been an amazing talk that we've had. But anything that you'd want to add, or that maybe you want to throw in that we didn't cover, or parting shots for the audience, I open the floor for you.
I guess two things that come to mind when I was talking about when I was being interviewed about the similar interviews at Boeing and at Northrop Grumman, and one of the comments that was talking about, you know, how do I get into this? It sounds like grandstanding. So,
Go ahead.
Go for it. You got time.
It was kind of like lessons to the people that are just coming into the business, and then just saying, you know, I grew up in a world where doing the wrong thing could get you killed, and doing nothing could get you killed almost as fast. So, you know, you need to make decisions, go with it, you know, and it's trying to keep people from being so tentative. I see a lot of people that tend to, you know, just kind of not go anyplace. You know, it's like they're stuck because they can't make a decision and just do it. So that was, you know, that's the one bit of advice I had for younger people.
That's great advice.
When I was sent to public speaking school when I was with Customs down in Georgia, and our final, we had to give it was like a 10-minute speech. They took all the clocks out of the room, but they gave you a random topic the night before, like end of class, here's your topic, 10 minutes tomorrow, go. And mine was on leadership and decision making. And it's like, oh, I got this, because I had a supervisor back in the port who, super nice guy, loved him, but every time we asked him, like, okay, what should, there's certain things that you can't do unless a supervisor says you can do it. And every single time was, I don't know, what do you normally do? Like, ask a supervisor. Like, and so I gave the whole speech on like, hey, you just got to make a decision as a leader. Like, we can move forward and adjust, but if you don't make one, we're kind of boned. So yeah, just make a decision, like keep moving forward.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I guess, one of the lessons I learned was in-country training and in Vietnam was I was playing being an officer. I just got my bars and the sergeant tried to tell me what to do, and I got in a big argument about him telling me what to do. And 8 months later, no, not even, probably 3 months later, I found out what you do. What you do is you find the guys that really know what they're supposed to be doing, and you fall in behind them. It doesn't really matter what rank they are. And I remember that movie with Meg Ryan, where she's a medevac helicopter pilot, medical corps, and they get shot down, and she's setting up the perimeter. I said, what I would have done, instead of giving orders to a bunch of grunts in your helicopter, I would have said, I'm ordering you to tell me what I need to do to stay alive. So,
yep.
Knowing your limitations, I guess, and relying on the people that have the experience that you don't have.
Yeah, what's the quote? Look for the guys with the mud on their boots.
Yeah, and that's that's the way A Troop was. I don't know if everybody was that way. There's no rank. I mean, in our flight crews, the only rank everybody had detachable rank, and when we had to go someplace to another base, we'd check out the officer club and the L club and figure out which was the nicest one, and then somebody pull out the brass that they needed to get for everybody to go in. It wasn't like they went off to the O, or we went to the O club and they went to the NCO club. We all went to the same club.
Yeah, I think Tony Cortez told me once, a lieutenant, he was a CSM, a command sergeant major at that point, and a brand new lieutenant got mad at him for some perceived slight, and he just looked at her and said, I've got shoelaces that have more experience in the Army than you do.
So. That was the other thing I learned early, was to always suck up to the first sergeant. So the minute I hit troop, I went to Sergeant Sparacino and tried to endear myself to him. Because if you need to get something done, that's where you go. No
it's
offense
always
to,
yeah.
No offense to 6 and 3.
That's good advice in life. Figure out who can provide and do what you need. But thank you so much for agreeing to do this and being so incredibly open with us today. I think people are going to respond to this quite well. And if you didn't respond to it, I'm sorry, I don't know what else to do for you, audience member.
Thanks for asking me, and I'm glad that Craig hooked us up.
Yeah, this has been a really nice conversation, Glenn. Thanks for everything you've told us, and thanks for everything you've done.
No, thanks, Dustin.
And so for everyone following along on Facebook, if you're just hearing about us, give us a like. If you're seeing this on YouTube, same thing, subscribe to the channel. And hopefully very soon now we're going to be going up on the podcast channels as well.
Any minute now.
Any minute. Once Dustin gets us a logo. But thank you for following along. Glenn, don't go anywhere. I'm going to stop recording. I won't do like I did with Paul and accidentally end the entire meeting. I'm going to stop recording here in a second. So again, on Facebook, it's going to say the feed was interrupted or something, or it's ended. And thank you, and have a good day there.